Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we'll be taking a look at this Italian bistro scene. Just doing a commentary on how I set up, the process that I went about to model shade and light. So hopefully this can be insightful for some of you fellow artists. Right now I'm just in the blockout phase. And I used to kind of rush into scenes and just start building out the things that I was most interested in and spending too much time on that. But I found that this blockout phase really is beneficial. Thankfully it's sped up as well because it can be a little time consuming. I feel like it's front loading a lot of the design at the start of your project, which is good. It's a good thing because it allows you to make a lot of the important decisions up front and get them out of the way, and then later you can focus more on the details, which can be kind of the more enjoyable part maybe. But I don't know, I've actually grown to really like the blockout. I feel like my mind is filling in a lot of the details with just basic shapes on the screen. So it's kind of fun to exercise the imagination as far as what it'll overall look like when it's finished. So nothing super fancy right now, just laying down some big shapes. If you're into drawing or painting, which I never really could paint. I did some art in college, and painting was definitely a weakness, but thankfully there's 3D. I really enjoy the 3D art. Yeah, I just got focused on how I was doing that awning or that shade. So what was I saying? 3D art, drawing, painting, right, blocking stuff out, big shapes. So yeah, the point of the blockout here is you're trying to get size and proportion correct. A lot of adjusting. And the reason it's good to do that at the start is so that when you have more objects and more things in your scene, if you want to tweak it, it's going to take a lot more effort to shift and move things around. Even here, I feel like I'm probably, I think I just wanted to visualize what the tiles might look like as far as the size goes. But yeah, the blockout, super important. If you're not doing that now in your practice or your process, I'd highly advise it. It really helps get the foundation down, and then later you have that foundation to add details on too. So right now, just modeling the basic chair shape. It's actually really handy to work with as little geometry as possible. In this case, it's just an edge with several vertices, and so you can just take one vertex and move it around into position. You can bevel the vertex to give it some rounding. The top there, you'll see throughout the video, I think I tried to approach it a few times throughout the video to close the gap, and it took a few tries, but we did make it. But right now this is just kind of the basic shape, and that's kind of my approach with this blockout. Was I wanted to move really fast and get the main pieces in. So I didn't focus too much on the geometry. Obviously the geometry wasn't in a finished state. It was going to be refined throughout the project. Just moving in some windows there, shifting things around, copying the awning. I actually don't know what that's called, the shade. Those plants are just kind of temporary blocks too. Here I actually started going into detail. I don't know why. I thought it looked cool to put in some extra detail on this plant pot, and I kind of tried a couple things, and I got caught up in the detail there. For some reason, that seemed attractive to do, just give it some additional shape. But I mean, even that chalkboard sign, like the menu sign there, is just a cube, right? So here's a cool trick, just stealing the geometry, like the edge that runs around the building, and then you can press Shift D to duplicate the edge, and then P, and then that'll separate the selection into a separate object. And then you can go into that object, you can extrude it, you can like extrude the edge up, so you have just flat faces, and then you can extrude those faces out for depth and continue to shape those. And I do that a few times, you'll see. Another thing that I tried to do is move around a lot. Again, like blocking out, being like moving fast, iterating fast, trying to get things into place as fast as possible, but moving around and shifting things. So, you know, focus on one area for a little bit, and then maybe go and refine, not like refine into more details necessarily, but like refine the shape, the proportion, the placement. And that's really the focus on the block out for me, is the placement and proportion, the two pieces. There might be more, actually. Be curious if others have, if you have different things in mind when you're doing a block out. Leave a comment and let us know. It'd be helpful for the community. Throwing in just a basic plant pot, a smaller plant pot there with some basic blobs for stand-in plants. I still didn't go into a lot of detail for the plants at the end, by the end, but again, just throwing shapes in and seeing what sticks. Placement and proportion. You can see me adjusting the placement of the awnings, raising them up so that you can see the windows better. Adjusting scale. And here I'm starting to add bevels to the table legs, so that may have kind of signaled the end of the main block out for me. Adding the bevel, adding some smoothness, some smoothing and some subdivision to it to start giving it a much smoother shape, which I also did to the tabletop as well. So that went by really fast with the tiles, what happened there. But I can explain it. So when you split the plane into several different faces, which I subdivided, you can highlight all the faces, and I just learned this recently through trial and error. You can press Alt-M, and it'll bring up like a separate menu, and you can separate by, I think it's faces by edges, and that'll separate each individual face. It's still one object, so it's not like separate selection with like the P hotkey, but it'll break the faces apart so the edges aren't connected anymore. And then when you go and throw on a bevel, or like solidify first and then a bevel modifier, it'll smooth them all, it'll smooth each face, so now it looks like an individual tile. So really fast way to break up the ground plane. And there's a cool trick that I used with that on those tiles later that you'll see, which I'll point out when we get there. But so yeah, definitely adding in some more detail here, some more shapes, some detail around the sides of the building at the bottom and the top. Pulling out some windows as well. I think this is where I tried to refine the table again, or the chair. Yeah, that back. I was really struggling to see like why isn't it connecting? You can see that there's a gap there. So I really did struggle with that. There's something that I need to learn still about it, because in the end, yeah, I had to not really give up, but here's just extruding another edge. I love the trick where you just have an edge and then you convert it to a curve, and then you can give it some depth to the geometry. It's such a fast way to get like a pipe or a handle or yeah, it's one of my favorite tricks. Here I'm doing a salt and pepper shaker. Give it a solidify and then duplicate that object and then just adjusting the scale, because eventually that outside container will be glass, so you'll be able to see into the salt and into the pepper. I'm not sure if I liked this approach, going into the viewport display settings and changing it to wireframe. It let me see inside the container, but in the end, when I finally was in shading and I had to give the container, like the glass container, the actual glass shader, it was still set as wired, so I had to go to the objects and then change them back to change all the salt and pepper shakers. I add those salt and pepper shakers to the other table too, so then there are 4, and for each one I had to go and adjust and set the viewport display settings back to rendered or textured. Yeah, to textured. So it was a bit of a hassle. I think next time I'd probably just, I don't know, there's an easier way where you can set on the material for the object. You can just give it a quick material and set the viewport display for that material. You can set the color to somewhat alpha, or to have a bit of an alpha value, so it's somewhat transparent. Yeah, that was a good idea, I think, as far as the overall design goes, to kind of play around with taking some of those tiles out to see if it aided the design. I didn't like how perfectly square it was, so I thought it gave it a bit more character in the end to just take out a few tiles. I hid them in case I decided that I did want to bring them back. Yeah, speeding this up really goes fast. Sometimes it felt like being in some of these stages, like the refinement stage for some of these objects, took a while. The chair took a while to adjust as well, but that's just, honestly, the process is just take your time. Yeah, that's where I finally fixed it. I applied the mirror modifier, so I got the actual geometry, and then just bridge those edges, and finally have just one piece of geometry around for the frame of the chair there. Lots of adjusting. There I was using the, you can press the O hotkey and that'll turn on. I always think soft select. I think that's a Maya term. I haven't even really used Maya, but proportional editing. There you go. O for proportional editing, and actually Shift O, I believe, will pull up a pie menu for the different fall off types. Italiano. I totally apologize if my fake Italian accent offends anybody. I actually do have Italian ancestry, and like one of my favorite foods is pizza, so it's legit. I like it Italian. And I also made fettuccine alfredo from scratch, not the noodles, but the alfredo sauce the other day. It turned out really awesome, so maybe that's what inspired this this art project. So initially I actually sketched this out, and it actually turned out pretty true to the sketch. Yeah, it actually turned out really close to the sketch, although as I was modeling it, I did add a few more things, and you'll find that too. It's like once everything's on screen, you know, and it's placed well, you might notice that there's a bit more space here. You might need to fill in this space here or shift something around. So that's what I was doing with these plant pots. It's just kind of trying to fill out the scene a little bit. In retrospect, I probably would have put like a hand or a guardrail or something. on the side, on the left side of it, along like where the sidewalk would be, separate out the street from the sidewalk. I was playing with a different way to approach these plants using icospheres. I'm not sure if I actually like the approach. I'd probably try something, a different approach later. They ended up having, even with shading, like subdivision, you can see the subdivision levels on two or three. Three renders two, but anyway, yeah, they're just too kind of lumpy and sharp. So I had to go back in, select the vertices, and then you can press Control V to bring up the vertex menu, and then I would smooth several times to just kind of remove those hard edges on the plant. So I don't know, it was like a new, just trying something new. And that's honestly, I guess, kind of the important part is I've been on this 1% better kick from the book Atomic Habits, and that was like one of the biggest takeaways is 1%. Oh, I should talk about what's going on here. Yeah, so just I separated all the tiles into separate objects, and then selecting those using the object menu, it has a randomized transformation. So I knew that I wanted to kind of shift these around, but I didn't want to do it by hand. So the randomized transformation lets you select if you want to, and it's transform, so it's any of the scale, rotate, or position, location. So you can randomize location, scale, rotation. You can set to what degree you want to alter those, and so that's what I was doing with the tiles. You can also set like the random seed, which will just change everything slightly. So I like the look overall. Imperfection's the digital perfection, right? I think Blender Guru said that in a talk. I think that was a Blender conference talk, actually. Maybe not. I just remember him saying that years ago when I did one of my first Blender tutorials. So what I didn't sketch was vines on the building, and by the time I got to this stage, I thought it was looking a little too bare, and so I thought it might be actually kind of cool to throw some vines on. So I wanted to approach that with geometry nodes, which turned out to be super easy. I'm still like, there's so much to learn about geometry nodes, and honestly, I am super basic with geometry nodes. But if you can remember, I feel like for this kind of thing, like scattering objects along a mesh, it's basically distribute points and instance to points, I believe. And as long as I can remember those two things, it's kind of easy to remember the rest. Like, okay, now I need a value to randomize the value, to randomize the rotation, and you have to join the geometry at the end, so the original geometry, that original curve is there, not just, the curve disappears and the vines are on where the curve would be. But that's the basics. Somehow I messed up here though, and I'm repeating what I just did, because I wanted to practice on the cube geometry. And so I set this all up on the cube, deleted the cube, and I thought, like a material, it would still be there, but for some reason I couldn't put the vine back on this new curve object, so I had to set it back up. So I was really happy with how that turned out, and how easy it was to just be able to draw the vines on after. In the curve, you can see the tool that's highlighted on the left on the toolbar. It's not the annotate button. That actually confused me a few times. It's the draw curve button, just a little bit lower. And that's what you can use to draw the curve. You can see on the right side, it says the depth, and then there's surface. If you select that, then you can draw the curve on a surface and it'll be flat against it. So I was really impressed. I haven't used geometry nodes a ton, but how easy that was to throw those vines on to give it like this cozier Italian feel was really impressive. some issues here with flipped normals, so I had to select all those normals, flip them manually, so I could give that the solidify modifier. Doing the same thing as I did with the ground plane, and just separating those all out into separate faces, separate objects, and randomizing the transforms a bit. It is important to check the face orientation every now and then of your project. I've seen some tutorials where the artists, they're just in the habit of just flipping normals themselves. Although I've run into issues where I'll hit Shift N to flip the normals, but it doesn't flip them all correctly. In fact, that happened with the tiles on the roof. So using that face orientation overlay, super helpful. You can add that to your quick menu, obviously, by right-clicking on it, adding it to the quick menu, and just hitting Q whenever you want to see the orientation. Blue being the normals are good, a red color overlay being the normals are bad. You'll have to flip them. All right, we're into shading. It's really interesting how when you're doing the project, sometimes I wonder like how, even though I think the modeling's pretty decent, I wonder if it's actually going to work out with the shading. But you'll see as I shade this project, the materials are pretty basic. There's not a lot of fancy stuff that I'm doing, and I mean, you can go like super realistic if you want, but obviously this is more like an illustration, and so I was just focusing more on the color and I guess roughness. I use noise for variety and bump as well, for the bump, for the normals rather. But it really started to come to life once I started adding these materials on. And also kind of the same thing as blocking out modeling, kind of blocking out materials, just getting, I was trying to work fast as well, not focus on any one thing too long, because I did several passes where I would change up the color. Like this starts out as a blue, and later it's like an olive green, which I think worked better for the Italian theme. Yeah, the blue, So yeah, later I'll do a pass and change that blue to green, thankfully. But yeah, just giving this glass some bumpy material just to make it a little more interesting instead of just flat glass. Really easy to do. I just used Voronoi there, adjusted the scale and threw that in the bump node and the bump to the normals. There I was using the proportional editing as well to move the vertexes of the vine curve, the vertices rather, and worked out really well to move them away from the sign. One thing I tried to do is add some color variety to something. So like here I'm doing the salt, and I didn't want just like white, like a bumpy white texture, but like I added in this kind of, it's almost like a creamsicle kind of thing. It looks like pink Himalayan sea salt. In the end, I was actually pretty pleased with how that turned out. And I still haven't like really gotten used to EV and glass materials in EV, so I switched over to cycles here so I could see what that glass material looked like, and how you'd be able to see the contents in those shakers. So again, just like the blockout, now I'm going into refining some of these textures, giving these plants a bit of bump, a bit of color gradation, just so it's not so flat color. On the Mac, you can press Command B, and that'll let you draw render region on the screen, and so I'll do that often just so I can see a certain area of the screen faster when I'm doing materials. It'll just render that one clipping. Here I'm throwing in a super cheap wood material. I just took a noise texture and scaled it, just stretched it super stretched on an axis. Gave it some color variation. At first I was like, oh, I want wood, but I didn't want to mess with a wood texture, importing that. And so I thought it turned out pretty well for like a poor man's wood texture. I was pretty pleased with it. Trying to figure out like the right shade. I liked the contrast on that blue, but eventually we'll change the blue too. I was trying to spin that texture a bit. Ultimately, I ended up just spinning the tabletop, just to give it some variety to the angle of the grain. But we're coming up to the end. I'll be lighting here anytime soon. If you found this helpful, especially like the commentary style, I know a lot of these tutorials. I've watched a lot as well. I've learned a lot from this style of tutorial, like the time lapse. But I wanted to see. I was hoping that the commentary would be beneficial, to talk about my experience, to share some of the tricks, and even just like random side stories. So if you've appreciated that, consider liking and subscribing. I'd love to have you back on the channel and be part of the community. So here I've added this texture, which was really cool. I went to AI, generated a chalkboard menu texture, and just threw it in, like quickly unwrapped just that one plane and opened the image. And yeah, I was impressed with how fast that went into. Just refining the chairs a bit more, adding some of the that same chrome material to the sides of the seats. And back in layout mode, well, I guess not, it was solid, just adding some tweaks to locations, often working out of the camera perspective, just so that you get the changes in context as far as like how the camera's going to see them. At this point I realized that the door was missing a handle or like a metal plate for a push guard, you know, so that the wood itself isn't getting worn down. But that was an interesting challenge here with this angle, the door being on an angle. Like I couldn't work in the global X or Y. So I often was, you can see the orientation, the pivot. Is it pivot? No, I actually don't know the name of that menu at the top. It says normal instead of like global or local. Adding in a welcome mat. Just a subtle addition. We're missing one in our front door of our house, and so of my house. So I was like, yeah, it definitely feels weird without a welcome mat in front of your front door. I don't know, where I live anyway. Maybe it's a cultural thing. All right, so here we go into lighting. Lighting is still a challenge. I try to keep as few lights as possible, not necessarily for render mode, but even here near the end of lighting this, I found it was getting unwieldy. I wanted a backlight, and I had to crank it to like 20,000 just to get it visible. I knew I wanted to approach this without a sunlight, although I think I did in the end, just to fill a little bit of the darkness in, but I didn't want that to be the primary light. So I guess just like a personal challenge. I've seen some other YouTube videos they talked about it, but I don't think they actually like showed how to do it, how they go about doing it. They just kind of showed like, hey, you can get these results without a sun lamp. So that's still something that I'll be practicing. And that's honestly one of the things I love about Blender, is there's so much to learn. There's so much that interests me, and there's so much to practice now. And every update, there's like the Blender Foundation's adding more and more tools, more things that can affect your workflow. And so, yeah, just always learning and creating. It's great. It's a great outlet. So it's putting an area plane up top. That's kind of the primary light, almost acting as like the skylight. One trick that I will share with lighting, that I feel like I can share with lighting, is just searching for the right power. And sometimes you might just be cranking the power up and down, trying to find the right number. But if you start high, so that it's like blown out of proportion, you know that it has to be less than that number. And so I'll try to like go to half that number. And if it's still too high, then half that number. So from 10,000 down to 5,000 down to 2,500. It's basically just a binary search, like cutting the number in half and going either above or below that number by half. I don't know if that makes sense. I don't think I'm explaining it very well. But it's like a quick way to find the right power. And I think the lighting worked out pretty well, honestly, for not really having a sun lamp as the primary light. I was pretty happy with it. I threw some random point lights throughout to kind of fill in some of the shadows. But overall, I was pleased with how it turned out. I wasn't pleased with how this turned out. I was hoping I could just like wrap this text, this 1004 Lasagna Lane address, just wrap it around this this awning umbrella thing over the door. But yeah, I struggle with it. So another thing I'll have to learn and practice. Eventually, I just separated some of the words and manually positioned them. I didn't want to spend a ton of time for myself or for you, the viewer, having to watch me struggle through trying to wrap that around. But it worked out okay. I thought it was an okay I was still trying to wrap to bend it, but yeah, the simple deform didn't work out. I was playing with the origin there, but yeah, it worked out okay in the end. I think I backed out of, it was all artifact there. So I think it was just the geometry didn't have enough resolution, but here I'm changing the strength of the world lighting. It was actually quite high, and so I think that was one of the reasons why I had to really crank some of the lights up. And once I dialed it down, I liked the contrast better. I feel like it stood out from the plane better. And then I could see that backlit or that backlight a little better too. If you have any personal lighting tricks, let us know in the comments. That'd be super helpful. I don't have much photography experience either, so lighting is still a struggle. Still something that I'm learning and practicing. So here's the final output. If you made it this far in the video, you are awesome. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it or the commentary, let me know. Give me a comment, a like, or consider subscribing. We'll see you again soon.